Good evening, everyone. My name is Lindsay Newton, and I work with community engagement at the Missouri Historical Society. On behalf of MHS, I would like to welcome you to STL History Live and to celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month. We are excited for you to join us virtually. Thank you for being here. Tonight's program, Honoring Hispanic Heritage Great Leaders in Our Region, is presented in collaboration with Hispanic Leaders Group of St. Louis, and we are celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month. On behalf of MHS, I simply want to acknowledge the dynamic Latinx community here in St. Louis. There are so many individuals and groups who are committed to working together and making our community stronger, and we are so grateful to share this platform with you tonight. I'm excited to introduce you to this evening's moderator, who will in turn introduce you to our panelists momentarily. But first, I need to quickly mention a few details about how the program will run. This will be a roughly 15-minute panel discussion with about 10 minutes at the end saved for questions and answers from the audience. And you can submit questions through the Q&A button in your toolbar. Please know that we'll do our best, but we may not have time to answer all of your questions. Also, tonight's program is being recorded, so if you'd like to view it again or share it with others, it will be posted on the Missouri Historical Society YouTube channel early next week. And also the Hispanic Leaders Group will be sharing it on Facebook. Your feedback is always important to us. We would really appreciate if you could answer a few questions for us after the program. A Kobo Toolbox survey will soon open in another tab on your browser, so keep an eye out for that when you leave the session. I know that some of you watching are Missouri Historical Society members. Thank you. We are very grateful for your support. And we also sincerely thank city and county residents for your tax contributions through the Zoo Museum Tax District. Your support makes all of our programming possible. And with that, I am going to turn this to our moderator, Omar Maldonado. Omar is a financial representative at Thrivent and a past Hispanic Leaders Group chairman of the board, as well as the host of a weekly podcast. Omar, thank you so much for being here this evening. Take it away.
Thank you, Lindsay. Tonight, the Hispanic Leaders Group of Greater St. Louis celebrates the many leaders who have made significant contributions to our region. In observance with Hispanic Heritage Month, the Hispanic Leaders Group and the Missouri Historical Society is teaming up with the History Museum to recognize those who have received the prestigious Premio Esperanza Hope Award. The presentation will include a brief history of the HLG's accomplishments and explain how the organization fosters harmony, diversity, and inclusion of St. Louis's vibrant Hispanic Latinx community. Now, as we begin, we would like to recognize LIUNA Local 110. That's a local international union of North America, as they are our platinum sponsor. And for several years, LIUNA has been a community partner by collaborating and supporting the mission of the Hispanic Leaders Group. Now, it's my honor this evening and pleasure to introduce this evening's panelists. Anna Crossland. She is president and CEO of the International Institute and past recipient of the 2011 Hispanic Leaders Group Premio Esperanza Hope Award. Alejandra E. Johnson, attorney at law at AJ Legal Services and member of the Hispanic Leaders Group Board of Directors and president of the Hispanic Bar Association of St. Louis. Guillermo Rodriguez, past president of the Hispanic Leaders Group of Greater St. Louis and president of the Council on Foreign Relations, St. Louis Committee. Daniel Gonzalez, director of exhibits research at the Indiana Historical Society. And Antonio Maldonado, chairman of the board of the Hispanic Leaders Group of Greater St. Louis. I'd like to introduce to you Antonio Maldonado, Chairman of the Hispanic Leaders Group of Greater St. Louis.
Good evening. Thank you, Omar, for that great introduction of all the panelists. I want to welcome the people that are joining us via Zoom for this great presentation tonight. Tonight, our panelists will discuss various different topics and they will answer various questions. I myself was asked a question, I think Omar asked that question off screen, but basically what I want to say is that the Hispanic Leaders Group mission is to foster harmony, community, networking, education, and advocacy with great diversity in the greater St. Louis region. Our goals and objectives, the purpose of the HOG is to serve as a coalition organization for the greater St. Louis Hispanic community. It promotes Hispanic views on issues such as education, culture, language, immigration, policy, analysis, health, economic development, organized labor, employment, political awareness, and civil rights. HOG acts as a positive influence and conducts a focused Hispanic energy and resources of the greater St. Louis voice in our community. What we do. A lot of times they ask us what we do. We have general memberships, we have Hispanic Capital Day, we have our flagship awards, which is the Esperanza Award. The actual award is right there behind me that is given to a leader that has done great things for our Hispanic community. And they are recognized by their peers of other leaders through a nomination process and then awarded the award. We have civic engagements that happens during our general membership meetings every even month of the year. We have Hispanic Capital Day, like I said, which is a day that we go to Jefferson City and advocate for our issues that reflect a lot of the concerns from other Hispanic groups. We are the voice for those concerns when we address those concerns with the governor and his cabinets. Another one of our great programs is the Hispanic Scholarship Alliance, where we bring together a lot of the Hispanic organizations that want to give out scholarships. We combine them in a joint ceremony, usually in the month of scholarship, which is July. And the Hispanic Scholarship Alliance comes together, one venue, to give out scholarship to deserving Hispanic students. We do that on an annual basis. Last year, we gave out over $87,000. This year, because of COVID, thanks to STL TV, we were able to do that virtually. And again, we gave out a lot of money to deserving students. You can get onto our stlhog.org webpage, so you can see some of the pictures of the events and you can see some of the programs that we have going. With that, Omar, I'll hand that over to you. If you have any other questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you for that, Antonio. I do have one question for you. Why does the Hispanic Leaders Group hold such a special place in your heart?
Well, I have, since moving to this area in '83, which was the same year that the Hispanic Leaders Group was founded by Anthony B. Ramirez, who also founded the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. I have seen how this organization and group of people have really been passionate about gathering these issues, social issues, about advocating for our Hispanic community in the area, about making our local leadership and politicians accountable for some of the things that they will be responsible for making laws, or to take a look at our community. The word assimilation sometimes is not fair to be used with our community because we are very, very, very productive. We assimilate, but for some reason in a lot of past history, people still think that we need to assimilate, but we have already assimilated. We already have the language under control. We already have work. We already build businesses. We already do a lot of social service, and we already bring a lot to the table, and we already service our community and are very service-minded.
Thank you, Antonio. Thank you for that. And speaking of history, I'd like to reintroduce Daniel Gonzalez. Now, Daniel, you earned your MA in Museum Studies right here in St. Louis at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. And you've been a researcher, a museum curator, and were also promoted to the position of historian for the St. Louis County. So my question for you is, how long-standing is the Hispanic Latinx community in St. Louis? And from a historical perspective, could you share with us the historic impacts on the broader St. Louis community?
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate the question. I think it's a really important one. We're celebrating the work of the Hispanic Leaders Group, and it's very worth celebrating and falls within this much larger story, this long history of Hispanic and Latino contribution in and in the surrounding. We can trace Hispanic history in the St. Louis region going back to the beginning of European settlement in the region. Before French folks founded the city, it had already been, although they didn't know it yet, signed away, the land had been signed away to be Spanish territory. So one of the oldest buildings in St. Louis County, Casa Alvarez, which is located in Florissant, was built and owned by a Spanish family who came here to work under the Spanish lieutenant governor in the area in the 1770s. So that's pretty far back. The development of immigrants from Mexico came beginning in the early 19th century. So as the Santa Fe Trail began to develop, all of these trading relationships brought folks like Miguel Ortega, who was served under St. Louis's first mayor, William Carr Lane, and studied at St. Louis University in the 1840s. Or Juan C. Armijo, who at 26, when his father passed away, was studying here in St. Louis and became one of the wealthiest men in New Mexico. That was in 1890. One of my favorite early people to mention is the Sandoval family, who came around 1890. Their oldest daughter, Isabel, was a driving force in developing business and community relations between the country of Mexico and St. Louis. She even was hosted by the Mexican dictator Porfirio Diaz in 1907. So this all this relationship developed into significant ties that had huge economic dividends that helped build this city. At the end of the 19th century, $7.5 million in economic output between the city of St. Louis and the country of Mexico, which is why by the late 19th century, St. Louis had a Mexican consulate, a Mexican commercial exchange, and a Spanish language newspaper. But those contributions, the development of the community didn't stop in the 19th century. Immigrants continued to come in larger numbers in the 1910s and 20s and have continued to grow into today. I mean, it's, I guess there's a lot more to that history, and I could keep going for a while, but I probably should stop there.
That is fantastic. Thank you, Danny, for that. That actually starts leading into one of the questions that gets brought up periodically, which is in St. Louis, what can be done so that more of the Hispanic, Latinx, and the broader greater St. Louis area can be educated on the impact of that Latinx community and where we are today?
Yeah, I think it's super important. You know, one of the things that needs to happen, I think, is there needs to be additional scholarship. You know, I spent some time while I was working for St. Louis County, digging into mostly the history of the Mexican community and the Mexican American community in St. Louis. But certainly, you know, it's been mentioned before that the Hispanic and Latino community in St. Louis is far from homogenous, and there are folks from a variety of backgrounds, different countries of origin, different experiences coming to St. Louis, different reasons for coming. So there's a lot of scholarship, a lot of work, a lot of answers that need to be gained about the history of the Latino community as we sort of continue on and telling these stories. But what we do know, what has been learned, I think to your point, Omar, hasn't been widely disseminated. And so what I hope is that everybody who's listening and all of our other panelists can work to share these stories as they have opportunities to let folks know. You know, when I came to St. Louis, I moved to St. Louis in 2008. And one of my questions was, you know, what is the story? What is the history of Latinos? And folks told me, you know, that you know, the history goes back to the 1980s. And you know, what I discovered pretty quickly was that was pretty wrong. I mean, over 100 years wrong, over 150 years wrong. So yeah, I think it's just going to take everybody sort of in their share of telling these stories when they have the opportunity to.
Thank you so much for that, Danny. It actually leads us right in to our next panelist, Guillermo Rodriguez. Now, Guillermo has been a past president of the Hispanic Leaders Group, very active in the Hispanic community. Now, from a historical perspective, who and why was the HLG created, and what achievements has the Hispanic Leaders Group had over the past 35 years?
Thank you, Omar, and thank you to everybody that is watching and will eventually watch what we have here. I like to write. I'm not a historian, but I like to keep records. And maybe that's why I was invited, you know, to be and talk about that. One of the things that I want to catch on, basically following on Danny's Gonzalez, and Danny, it was our loss, and it was Indiana's luck to have you move over there. I remember when you came here and we started talking about the history. But talking about history, in 1983, that's when the Hispanic Leaders Group was started. The estimated population at that time of Hispanics here was 23,300. Barely 1% of the total population, and I'm only talking about the Missouri and Illinois, the statistical community, the metropolitan region to which we belong. As of 2019, which is the most recent estimates that I have, July of 2019, the estimate was that 84,000 Hispanics were living in the St. Louis area, the St. Louis region, which accounted for 3%. So from 1% to 3%, the population of the area increased from 1983 to 2019 by 15%, but the population of Hispanics here grew by 360. So from 1% to 3%, and of course it will continue growing. So it started in 1983. Tony already said a lot of the things that I could have said, but basically we have to honor Tony Ramirez. Anthony B. Ramirez in 1982, he founded the Hispanic Chamber, and the next year founded with some other people, the Hispanic Leaders Group. The idea was, let the chamber deal with business issues, and then have the Hispanic Leaders Group take non-business issue into to take care of the need to educate, to promote the issues of the Hispanic community across the board. So basically it started in 1983 with a group of people. It was incorporated 10 years later in 1993 by Tony Ramirez and Janine Hilbert and Hector Barron. So that was 1993. Tony was here in 1983. I moved here in 1994 from Puerto Rico and joined immediately after that. But to the question of what is it that we do, basically, and Tony mentioned a lot of the things. One of the things was, of course, the Hispanic Day at Jefferson City. That started in 2002. So for 18 years now, the Hispanic Leaders Group has organized a group from all around Missouri to go to Jefferson City to speak to the elected officials statewide and also the individual representatives and senators, in addition to visiting the Attorney General, the Secretary of State and others, and basically presenting our position in the different areas. One of the most important things was the English language issue a number of years ago. And the Hispanic Leaders Group, again, led by Tony Ramirez, was able to go over there and bring down the temperature, as we can say, and then realize that English is the common language, but that Missouri doesn't need an official language. And as far as I know, that's still the case. So that was a big win. Then the other thing is in 2003, that's when the Premio Esperanza came about. And the idea was to recognize people, not only Hispanics, that are providing great service to the community, to our community. And we have been doing that since 2003. I will come back to that later, very soon. I think I have like 50 minutes, so I will take 49 of those. Ha ha ha, okay. Then in 2004, we started the scholarship program, and that came about as a result of Image Incorporated ceasing to operate and donating to the Hispanic Leaders Group, a not-for-profit 501c3, $12,000, $12,800 plus. That was the seed money that started with the Hispanic Leaders Group providing scholarships, becas to students that go either to college, to the university, or also to trade schools. And that's still to the day the main objective, to provide that effort to help our students to go into higher education or into the trades. And all you need to do is to have good grades, good community service behind you, and have at least one of your grandparents that can be traced as a Hispanic, as a Latino. In 2010, after the passing of Tony Ramirez, the Premio Esperanza was changed, the name was changed, and now it's called the Anthony B. Ramirez Premio Esperanza. Esperanza means hope, things that we're looking for. In 2010, we were very active in promoting that people would get counted. I remember getting involved with that. And of course, this year, we're the decennial again, and we are providing that information and helping, asking people to get counted. I did it as soon as I was able to do it online, and that I think helps a lot of people. Omar, I see you. Do you mean that I have to shut up?
No, I have a follow-up question to that. So you spoke about the Anthony B. Ramirez Premio Esperanza Award. Could you share with us the significance of that award, and why are the recipients of that award chosen and honored?
Okay, let me read basically on the brief that we have here. And basically it was to recognize people that usually are not recognized. People that mainly behind the scenes, although there are certain exceptions, have been helping the community at large, but are doing it without any recognition. Now, a lot of these people, they don't want the recognition, but we felt that it was important to provide that information to the public, not necessarily only to our community, but abroad. this goes also to your previous question to Danny Gonzalez, in the sense, what can we do to educate people about our community here? Well, one of the things that we can do is also to recognize annually people that deserve that recognition because of the service provided to our community. And again, one of the interesting things is that only 74% of the Esperanza Award recipients have been Hispanic. The others have been, and I can mention them, Marvin Kenny was the first one to be awarded the Premio Esperanza in 2003. He went up and beyond his work at the Post-Dispatch by creating a supplement that was provided free of charge to everybody. I was there, and other people were there. At the same time, that was two winners or two recipients at the same time. The other one was William Chignoli, when he was in charge of La Clínica and Acción Social. Out of these 14 people that have been recognized, most of them, 12 of them, have been recognized because of the community service. In many cases, voluntary services, not because it's my work to do it, but because in addition, I want to do it voluntarily, okay?
Yes.
One was Up and Beyond. It was Rafael Numarin because of his effort outside of his business as a banker when he was leading the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Public service. We have 3 people that have been recognized because of the public service and how that impacted and helped our community.
Yes.
The first 2, Tim Fluke
Yep.
from Kansas City, or actually from Independence, and Maria Chapel Nadal from here, and she's still in Jefferson City. And how come that 2 of opposite parties, of opposite sides of Missouri, probably one a Cardinal fan and one the Royals fan, were able to get together to help in there. And of course, we cannot forget the fantastic service and help that we got from Charlie Dooley. Good evening. Charlie was fantastic. He would always go to all of our events. He always asked for people to be in commissions, and I know that some have gotten there. And of course, that's a need that the county and the city and other cities, including smaller ones, would be benefiting by having more of our own people there.
Thank you for that,
The
Guillermo.
last year was Carmen Dense, and she got it for community service, but also I will have to highlight her efforts with in the culture and arts with her work.
Yeah, thank you. And in fact, with us today, we do have a recipient, a previous recipient of the Hispanic Leaders Group Premios Esperanza, and that is Anna Crossland. So, Anna, thank you so much for being here with us today. We are big fans of the work that you've done here in St. Louis. And my question for you is that as a recipient of that award, how has your association with the Hispanic Leaders Group enhanced the work at the International Institute?
Well, how many hours do you have for me to be able to speak? I assume that I just have a couple of moments. And so let me just very briefly say that it isn't just about me, but it's about the International Institute in total. And I was listening to Guillermo's long list of reasons that people had gotten it, and now feel totally inadequate because I don't fit into the category, it appears. But neither here nor there, I was awarded the Premio Esperanza, and certainly appreciate that gesture from the Hispanic Leaders Group. I actually knew Antonio Ramirez because I arrived at the International Institute in 1978. I was around in the early 1980s and was part of particularly the founding of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, was part of the initial group that sat together many evenings developing that organization and its charter, etc. And then later the Hispanic Leaders Group came around, and so I have a frame of reference in terms of that background and the purpose of for developing the organizations and what the desires were of the people who were involved initially in the organization and what they really hoped to be able to achieve. One of the reasons that I was really interested and willing in becoming involved initially was because of one of the staff members of the International Institute, Anne Reinierson, who retired from the Institute in 2009. Dr. Reinierson, who was a cultural anthropologist, in fact, was very close with the Hispanic community and did her dissertation on Mexican entrepreneurs down in the Chippewa neighborhood of South St. Louis. And so she was really very involved in the HLG during its early years, served on the board, was involved in organizing some galas, and really helped to get the organization off the ground during that early time period. And her interest and desire for that organization to succeed really rubbed off on me. And after her retirement, then I stepped in and became far more active than I had been earlier. And right around that time then was when the HLG then bestowed the Premio Esperanza Award on me on behalf of the International Institute, I'm quick to say. What it did for the International Institute and me as its representative is that it really reminded my staff and the community that the International Institute is about more than refugees. While we are perhaps most well known for our refugee resettlement programs, which have brought Vietnamese and Bosnians and Congolese and other populations to St. Louis that might not otherwise have found their way here, the reality is that when you look at the 6,000 people a year that we serve at the International Institute, a not insignificant portion of them are actually Latinx, and that these are individuals, in fact, who work all day long and come to English classes in the evening or otherwise participate in programs at the International Institute because they're interested in being able to really do the essentials that are important to be able to integrate into the community. And that's about speaking the language, understanding the culture. And along with understanding the culture, then, one of the ways in which we have continued to this day to still be very involved has to do with Festival of Nations and being able to broaden appreciation for the cultural heritage of so many St. Louisans, including our Hispanics. And it isn't just about they perform at the Institute, at the Institute's Festival of Nations, but there are really important individuals like, in fact, Carmen Dentz, who's another awardee who serve on the Arts Committee for Festival of Nations, so that there's an opportunity to be able to ensure that there is authentic and top-notch Hispanic artists that are participating in the festival, because it's really about, and this is something we go back to over and over again, being able to show the best of cultural traditions to the wider community here, so that they can understand and appreciate, and we can find those connections that are incredibly important to be able to build the bridges that are necessary to be able to connect and have a dialogue, have a means of being able to move forward. So the award itself sits on a table very near my desk, and I'm reminded that, in fact, I have one of the awards that Jaime Ramirez actually carved, and it's beautiful with all of the different flags that represent the different nationalities of Latinos here in St. Louis, and it always reminds me that the International Institute is about so much more, like the Hispanic Leaders Group is. It's about the whole. It's about the many different nationalities, the many different cultures that make up being Hispanic here in St. Louis.
Thank you so much for that, Anna. I know that for myself and my family and a lot of my friends at large, that the work that the International Institute has done is profound. And especially when we're speaking about the Festival of Nations, we know that's near and dear to our heart, and the people that we've come across in the St. Louis area. I just want to commend you and your organization, the work that it undergoes to be able to put on that festival, because that has become very much a source of pride in the St. Louis area. So thank you so much for your hard work.
Well, and let's hope in 2021 that we can bring it back again in person.
We're looking forward to that. Absolutely.
Yes, yes.
So I would like to introduce now Alejandra Johnson. Alejandra Johnson, as I stated before, is an attorney at law, and she also sits on the board of the Hispanic Leaders Group. Alejandra, my question for you is, how does the Hispanic Leaders Group help our community communicate with various officials in our region?
Thank you. Yes, let's see. Hi, sorry about that technical issue there. So, you know, there are a lot of different groups. We are a wonderfully rich and diverse group of people. Our community is very strong. It has been highlighted here. I was asked to speak, for example, at an event for a book signing and at a local independent bookstore, and I was asked, did I know anybody who knew anything about trauma with children and soccer? And I said, in fact, I do. I know the honor. I know Ricky Garza, and so that's going to be happening. His wife is going to be speaking at that event with me next week. And if you ask me, do you know any great immigration attorneys that speak Spanish? In fact, I do. Do I know financial advisors? In fact, I do. Omar Maldonado and others. We have a wonderfully strong community. One of the things that Hispanic Leaders Group does that I think kind of distinguishes it in many ways is that its work is not, you know, organizations sometimes put out statements. They say things are important and they reflect certain values with their words. And what I think distinguishes Hispanic Leaders Group in many ways is that it's actually, sometimes it's not even words. We don't put out statements. We don't do a lot of photo shoots. We do some photo shoots, but and opportunities, photo ops, but there's actually a lot of stuff that really doesn't get documented, which is something I'm very happy to hear Anna Croslin and other people talk about what we're doing this evening, because these activities are so much more than just putting out a statement, you know, 300 words. Oh, we support. We have people, for example, something I'm very proud of in the pandemic, that Tony Maldonado, and through the leverage, the relationships that have been built with the Hispanic Leaders Group over the last several decades, was able to, at a time when masks were not available and or very, very expensive, he was able to get 100,000 masks and was able to distribute those, regardless, not just to the Latinx community, not just among Hispanics, but to many people in the St. Louis area receive those masks. Another example of things that our board members do is Yvonne Bullinger from Affinia. I think they've been able to provide 15,000 COVID tests to the underserved and underrepresented communities. So that, when you say, how does Hispanic Leaders Group help our community communicate with the leaders? Well, in interacting with the county executives to get the masks, in interacting with elected officials and aldermen and other people in the municipality to get those tests set up. These are things that the Hispanic Leaders Group focuses on. We publicize. We're doing it individually on our own time, and we are coming together to organize. Another thing that's super important, I think, is the leadership development and the opportunity. I say this respectfully, I don't see any other groups, although we are a very rich and diverse community, as I've said, but Hispanic Leaders Group is the one that's really interacting with Jeff City. And so much of our culture, I think going back even to indigenous times, when you are looking at the Maya and the Aztec cultures, there was not a representative government. It's not, in Spanish you say, enchilame otra. It's not easy to know what to do in a democracy and how to engage with elected officials, and how you can go to Jeff City and talk to them and lobby. You can communicate via email. You can pick up the phone and call your congressperson's office. And so what I see that really distinguishes the Hispanic Leaders Group is training. For me, as an attorney, I advocate for my community, but I absolutely think it's a priority to empower our community. So Hispanic Leaders Group actually helps people learn and establish, and it is an enormous, I was involved in the Hispanic Capital Day. It is an enormous amount of work. Props have to be given to Tony and Maria for the bulk of that work, but of course there was a team of us, and it's an enormous amount of work. But to get 30 or 40 or 50 people engaged, and to Jeff City, Latinos speaking, so that the Secretary of State, all of the elected officials, the Treasurer, the Attorney General can see see our community being represented and being active and taking an active role civically. That is something that I really don't see too many other groups doing in developing that kind of leadership within our community. So, you know, again, just like Danny and others have said, we could go on and on, but that difference between making statements, a lot of people do that. A lot of companies do that. And if you see like the response sometimes to Black Lives Matter statements, you know, it can be performative. You can just, anybody can put out, have their PR, you know, I mean, I'm an attorney, I can draft a statement in a couple of hours at the most, right? But actually getting masks, getting tests, teaching people how to engage civically, and passing on that leadership, those skills that we need more and more in our community, and how to organize. That's something that I think really sets the Hispanic Leaders Group apart, frankly. Although this is not to dismiss in any way the wonderful efforts of all of the other groups that we have. It's easy as a community advocate to, like I said, oh, you need somebody great here? Here, there's already somebody, oh, you need somebody, oh, we have so much richness. For being a relatively small community compared to, say, a Chicago or a New York, we have a lot of powerful people in our region.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up. That I really hear how much work, and not just, you know, not just speech, but really in the trenches, really pushing the agenda forward to have conversation. Now, a little bit slightly different question on that. So I'm hearing a lot about how the Hispanic Leaders Group really interacts with the officials. How does the general public interact with the Hispanic Leaders Group?
Well, one of the things is that there are several membership meetings, general membership meetings that are open to the public. We have also hosted events here, like with the Missouri History Museum, what we're doing tonight, and publicizing that. Of course, we would always like to increase our presence. And one of the ways that that does happen is by the various board members, our own kind of advocacy and our own interactions with the community at the community colleges. We have members of the board, and that representation also matters in that way, that kind of visibility. And again, those kind of really concrete actions to try to have as much impact as possible. Of course, there's always room for improvement. You know, suggestions can be mailed to the website. We love having people come and speak. The Hispanic Capital Day is a great example of that. If you called the Missouri Secretary of State, for example, you would call that office and you probably would never get to speak to him directly, or her if it's ever, a female elected official. But with Hispanic Capital Day, you can sit in a room and chat with them for a designated amount of time. Cards are exchanged, networking opportunities that are provided. So there are a lot of different events that are very helpful, as well as, like I said, Tony going to events, myself going to events and supporting other community organizations, which I know we all do as much as possible.
Thank you for that, Alejandro. I appreciate everything that you spoke about and how others can get involved with the Hispanic Leadership Group. So thank you so
Absolutely.
much. So I'd like to open it up just to have some questions out there, and anybody can take any one of these questions on. But something that was brought up earlier, so this is open to the entire panel. Something that was brought up earlier was about the increasing population of the Hispanic community. And with that, we've seen increases also in cultural organizations such as the Venezuelan Society, Bolivian, Sociedad Puertorriqueña, and many, many more that are around. With all those cultural organizations, why is it so important that the Hispanic Leaders Group does what it does? Why is it so important for the Hispanic Leaders Group to be here in the St. Louis area? Who'd like to answer that question?
I was just going to ask, who is that question directed at?
That could be towards anyone here.
Can I would like to, I mean, others may have that. I just want to say that when I ran for office in 2017, I was talking to people who were really longtime political activists and involved in one way or another in politics very, very strongly. I mean, people who have done this for a living. And they really did not know very much about how strong our presence is. Certainly didn't know like the history that Danny is talking about and how long. So one of the things that has been my motto, my firm conviction, my goal has been to just increase our visibility. We are here, we are present, we matter, we contribute, as Anna said, in so many different ways. So a big thing is to have HLG out there, like I said, meeting officials, meeting the public, and doing these masks projects and other things that really increase the visibility. Just, we are here, and that's a real strength, I think, of HLG contribution. I'll turn off.
Yeah.
If I may,
Omar? Yeah. Omar?
Yes, Anna.
Yeah. I was going to say that my recollection back there when the organization was founded, first of all, let me say that a multitude of cultural and social organizations is not any different than it was 25, 30 years ago. It's not any different than it is from many other immigrant communities from other continents of the world. So that part, you have new people that arrive, they have different perspectives, they were raised in different generations, and so they gravitate together and form another organization, etc. And so there's always been this diversity of organizations. When HLG came into being, one of the purposes, in fact, of the organization was that it serve as a venue so that, in fact, representatives from the different organizations could get together on some kind of a regular basis and share information among each other about different kinds of activities and events, etc., that were taking place, and so that then they could learn some common kinds of issues and information that then they could take back to their own communities. And so that was a function of the HLG when it first developed, and actually is a function that still today remains important because of the continued diversity. You're not going to get rid of the diversity. So what you want to do is you want to be able to share information and perspectives, etc., so that everybody is knowledgeable.
If I may, Omar, and
Yes,
Thank
Please.
you, Anna, for bringing that up, because that's basically, that was the original. And now, the way I see it is you have all of these different organizations, but then we need somebody or an entity that will channel all of those things. And that's what the Hispanic Leaders Group can be. Instead of having 10 different people, 15 different people calling the same person in Jefferson City, we can have one person which is representative of all the others. So in that sense, the Hispanic Leaders Group is like is a coalition organization, to promote the issues that we have been talking about. So yeah, that's what I wanted to add.
I want to stick my 2 cents in here, Omar, on that question, and what Guillermo just alluded to. It is much, much better to go to the governor as an established organization instead of just an individual with some issues which can be interpreted as gripes. One of the things that our founder had always said was, we speak to the people in Jefferson City. We speak to them, we don't speechify. We don't bring big emotional speeches to the Hispanic Capital Day, but we talk about the issues. We speak to the issues of the day. And I wanted to also just mention something about my gratitude to some of our sponsors like Liuna, Local 110, who has been with us in every single type of event, be it Esperanza, Hispanic Scholarship Alliance, Hispanic Capital Day, the Harmony Circus event that we had at the college last year. Whenever we need their financial assistance, they're always there. They always find a way to support us. It's a process with a lot of people, especially this year in the age of COVID. I'm even doubly more grateful because I was even afraid to ask for any financial support for any of our events, but they were able to. So now please bear with me and take a look at this 1.5-minute video that we have created for our sponsor. This year, having to do the Hispanic Scholarship Alliance virtually, there was no way that we could have not done this without Liuna and their support. Also, the board of directors stepped up and did some financial support also to make sure. Here's Don Willie from Liuna. He won the Champions Award last year. Jorge Rivera, Charlie Dooley, Wolfington, Anna Crossland, and the Latinas of Distinction. These are all leaders. These ladies are all great leaders in our community. This was Hispanic Capital Day. We were with the governor in his office. Usually we go in a conference room, but he wanted to make sure we were in his office. Thank you to Liuna. Thank you for your support.
Thank you for that.
Omar, if I may, I should have mentioned this, and it has to do with the words that are attached to the Premio Esperanza. The honor is Premio Esperanza, and these are the words inscribed in it. To you for giving hope to those seeking change. A usted por impartir esperanza a esos que buscan cambio. And all of that, it's involved the spirit of the award.
Thank you for that, Guillermo. I have one final question, and my question is for Danny Gonzalez. We've heard tonight, Danny, that there are a multitude of Latinx communities in St. Louis and the importance of bringing those communities together. Share with us so we can get a clearer picture of how broad is the Hispanic community when we're talking about different backgrounds.
Yeah, no, I think this is a great question. In St. Louis, in the broader St. Louis region, the Latino community, the broader Hispanic community has representatives from dozens of countries. It has folks who come to St. Louis, are born in St. Louis, folks who work, and folks on the panel have touched on this, folks who work in a multitude of backgrounds, multitude of careers, who come from a multitude of socioeconomic backgrounds, of interests, and of talents. And this is something that, looking at the history of the Latino community in St. Louis, is not new. If we look at the community over a span of time, over the history of the region, we see contributions in expanding the culture of St. Louis in terms of cuisine, in terms of music, in terms of economic and business development, in terms of politics. There is an endless multitude of ways for us to define the diversity of the Latino community, of the Hispanic community in the St. Louis region.
Thank you so much for that. And even broader so,
Omar, I'm sorry, can I follow up with Danny on that?
Absolutely.
Because I had this question after Danny gave a fantastic presentation also through the Missouri History Museum about 4 months ago. And having grown up with a mom who, like Omar, like, your parents are so active, my mom and my parents were super active, and grown up with leaders and all of this, I had no idea about some of the stuff that you were presenting, Danny. And it's almost an erasure. There's like almost an erasure. Can you speak a little bit as to why this invisibility of the Latinx community? Why, just why? Like, why is it seems so, there are so many contributions. We've even had a Latino mayor. And I'm in politics, and I did not know that before your presentation. So it's been very surprising to me to see that kind of really almost intentional erasure. And I don't want to be overly suspicious, but if you could speak to that, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are some reasons for this that are true across the broader Midwest. I grew up in the Indianapolis area, and I had told people, when I was in secondary school, the only thing that I learned about Hispanics, about Latinos, was the Mexican War, and then a discussion of that there were undocumented people that existed. Those are the two things that I learned. That is extremely problematic, and it tells the wrong story about who is contributing to the story of St. Louis, to the story of the United States, and it tells the wrong story about who is, about what an American looks like, about what this country is about. So there is a real problem in terms of representation, in terms of the historical narrative. I think there are some reasons for that. The census is a great illustration of this, right? Latinos on the census are basically an invisible population until the 1970s and 1980s census, when you really start to have this community articulated in a clearer way. In the 1930s, you have a racial group identified as Mexican, but that is quickly removed, and that is a pretty problematic identification, because obviously we've just talked about how diverse the Latino community is. So the way that historical documentation has been developed, the kinds of people who were working at historical societies, frankly, I mean, the kinds of things that were collected make it harder. The people who decided what was going to be collected, what stories were going to be put into textbooks, weren't thinking about the diversity of these communities. So all of that kind of culminated and comes together, and there are some other factors too, but I think now we're in a position where we can start to undo those things, to start to tell the stories that we haven't been telling, or others hadn't told.
Thank you, Danny, for that. And that's a really great way, I believe, to bring this conversation to a temporary close. And I say temporary because this is a conversation that we can continue at home, continue in our everyday lives, but to understand that the Hispanic community, the greater Hispanic community here in the St. Louis region, is such a broad mix of different types of cultures, heritage, color, looks, traditions, even language. So with that, I'd like to thank all our panelists for being here tonight. Thank you so much to the Hispanic Leaders Group for all the hard and diligent work that you've done throughout the years. I congratulate you on a very hard and diligent job that you've done so far this year to ensure the success of the Hispanic community and the broader St. Louis community. With that, I'd like to say thank you and hand it back over to Lindsay.
Thank you, Omar, for leading this conversation this evening. And thank you, Tony, Danny, Guillermo, Anna, and Alejandra for sharing your work, your insight, your personal experiences and stories. I know it meant so much to me to hear everything that you shared, and I know it means so much to our community. I also want to thank Maria Maldonado, Sandra Knight, and Ricardo Garza, as well as Carl Hardy, who were supporting the program behind the scenes this evening. And thank you all for tuning in. I did just put a link in the chat. A few of you were mentioning the research that Danny Gonzalez did, and he presented that research more in depth on the Missouri Historical Society's platform a few months back. And that presentation is saved in YouTube, so I shared a link. And as I mentioned before, tonight's program is recorded. So if you want to watch it again, if you were late, if you know somebody else who would have loved to see it tonight, do check it out on our YouTube channel or on the HLG's Facebook page. I'll also just mention that there are 2 to 3 STL History Live programs each week. We would love to have you tune in again. And also, safety is a top priority. That's why we're doing virtual programs right now. But the Missouri History Museum is open Wednesday through Sunday with several safety precautions in place, and we would love for you to visit if you feel safe. Advanced reservations are required to visit all of the Missouri Historical Society locations, so just visit mohistory.org to plan your visit and reserve free tickets. Again, this was just a wonderful conversation tonight. Thank you, Leona, and thank you, Hispanic Leaders Group.
Let's take
Audience.
a picture, you guys. Wait a minute. Let's all turn on our cameras.
Everyone turn on cameras. Great
and let's
idea, Alex.
Screenshot, and everybody look at the camera. It's just like a real camera. You got to look at your camera and smile, okay?
Good job.
We're still missing some people, but that's all right. All right. Thank you so much. What a great event.
Good job.
Yay.
Thank you, everyone. See you again next time. Good night.
Night.
Night.